as everyone may be aware, at least on paper, we have at least 100 HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. And one of the main things that I've been promoting through my scholarship is to see how we can develop networks so that HBCUs, with all their professors in their different expertise, all the HBCUs with the different specialties, that we can somehow come together in a collaborative way to begin to organize our intellectual capital to assist Africa in its development. And so the panel assembled today has come out of that idea. And so we're going to first hear from our great ambassador who will speak about initiatives that are occurring with the African Union. And from there, each professor to her right will continue thereafter and speak about some of the things that they're doing at their universities, the expertise that they have. And then we'll come back to my brother Fandon here, who will speak on behalf of DSU and some of the great research he's doing. Okay, so I don't want to take much time. I want to get right into it. So our great, preeminent, lovable Ambassador Quao, we respect you and love you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I trust lunch was absolutely delicious.
I second that.
And then the problem is when they ask you to speak after lunch, I'm reminded of Idi Amin when he was invited to have dinner with the Queen. He got up to speak, and he wanted to let the Queen that he had had enough, and his belly was full. He got up and said, "Your Majesty, dinner was Coca-Colastic," of course. First of all, he had had Coca-Cola, and the person before him had spoken, had Fanta. He said dinner was fantastic. So he heard Fanta stick. Because he had Coca-Cola, he said Coca-Colastic. And I want you to know that I am fed up. That when you come to Uganda, he was going to revenge. My brother, I would like to let you know that lunch was fantastic, and when you come to DC, I am going to revenge. Once again, we are here to talk about the matters of the village. There are issues in our village, and I appreciate the opportunity for us to come together as members of the village to address the issues together. With what I know of the issues that are keeping us together, the difficulties that we are having as African diaspora, continental diaspora, and as African diaspora as African Americans, I know many of us have tried to go home to make a difference, and many of us have come back because the conditions on the ground were not conducive to what we wanted to offer. I used to take doctors on medical missions, and you would end up with a whole neurosurgeon, orthopedic surgeon, treating ear infections and sore throats, because that's all they could do. The country did not have the facilities they needed to do what they do best. Now, there are other reasons why some of us have gone home and come back. And I'm going to hit this nail by the head because it's something that we must speak to. When we go to Africa, as continental Africans who've been to, in my husband's country of Ghana, we call these people like me Bintus. I've been to America, I've been to Britain. We Bintus, we got issues. We go back home with an attitude. We think just because we've been to, we know more than the ones at home. That attitude has got to change. And it's one of the reasons why many people are not making it when the Bintus go back home. We also have African Americans who go to Africa thinking, I'm going to tell the Africans, I know more than the Africans. Well, guess what? You're wrong. Because Africans have a lot to teach you too. So there's a need for an attitude adjustment, realization that we have something to offer, but they too have something to offer us. What is needed is for us to work together, because united and understanding each other, That's the only way we can come together in a meaningful way and build the Africa that we want. At the African Union Mission, that's one of my mandates, two main mandates. One, to promote Africa in the Americas, and the second one, to bring the diaspora home by any means necessary. With that understanding, I sat down to ask myself, how then do I go about, one, taking this very diverse, interesting group of people who don't like each other, how do I go about bringing them together so we can go home? Looking at the issues that we are dealing with on this side of the Atlantic as well as the opposite side, I came to the conclusion that the only way we can effectively go back home as African diaspora to accomplish two things. One, yes, to bring the expertise that is needed, but two, I remember 2 years ago, President Trump was addressing the African heads of states, and he said, I don't know why you guys are poor. My friends go to Africa poor, they come back rich. Are you with me? So for those who think the African heads of states are calling you to come home because they just want your money, wrong. We are saying, if you don't show up and you stand up and be counted, next time the contracts go to the Chinese, shut up. How do we give you contracts when we don't know where you are? How do we know about your business when you don't stand up? And that is the challenge the African heads of states are running into. Next Tuesday, I think Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, there's a conference going on in Nairobi. Former Prime Minister of Kenya, Raila Odinga, is now over infrastructure. His advisor called, one of the Afro-champion advisors called me and said, Ambassador, we need you to put together a coalition of African diaspora who can come in and be together with Afro-champions, be the first to know of the projects, the developmental projects that are going on in Africa. There is nothing wrong with diaspora organizations building the next Cape to Cairo highway, the next Cape to Cairo high-speed train. You can only get those contracts when you are on the table. You heard my sister talk about, what did you call it?
Chamber of Commerce.
Right.
Pan-African Chamber of Commerce.
Pan-African Chamber of Commerce, but even when you talk about the single currency, when we have, there's something else you talked about, I just can't think right now. These are all opportunities that are going to happen in Africa at a continental level. You got to realize, because of the African Continental Free Trade Area, for the first time ever, Africa is going to be, the developmental agenda for Africa, we are looking at it as Africa, not as 55 different countries. So this is a tremendous entry point that if you, diaspora, if we don't organize, we are going to miss out. The heads of states are saying the diaspora must be in the front along with the Afro-champions. They're wanting to create a space for us. We got our 22nd ratification, which is what we needed in order for implementation to begin, was 2 weeks ago. We are talking of a baby who has just been born. I want everybody to be clear about that. We are in a beautiful place to be on the driver's side, driver's seat of the agenda, developmental agenda for Africa. So please, if you hear anything else from me, this is the time for us to organize and stand up, and let's take Africa where Africa belongs on the world stage. But in the process, we're also helping ourselves. There is nothing wrong with you investing your money in Africa, coming back home to America and play golf like they do. That's what we want you to do. So don't look at it any other way. It's a win-win situation. So with that in mind, in Washington, we set out to then say, where do we begin? Fortunately for us, first it was the president of Zambia. He stood up and he gave us 135 hectares of land, which is about 300 acres. And when the president of Zimbabwe heard about the 135 hectares, he said, my sister, why are they giving you 135 acres? Zambia has a lot of land. He said, you see, Victoria Falls, for those of you who don't know Victoria Falls, Google it, it's a beautiful place. It's one of the best tourist destinations in Africa. He said, Victoria Falls is like a woman. When you're looking at her from the Zambian side, you're looking at her back. But when you're looking at her from Zimbabwe, the choice is yours, which view you want. So he proceeded to give us 2,000 hectares. So we have been offered 2,000 hectares of land on the Zimbabwe side of Victoria Falls along the Zambezi River. Prime location. There, ladies and gentlemen, we, the African diaspora, in collaboration with our brothers and sisters on the continent, we are going to build our very own Wakanda. We're calling it African Diaspora Centers of Excellence. Why are we building Wakanda? Money alone is not enough to bring change, sustainable change that Africa needs. Capacity building is where it is at. Most of you may not realize that Africa today needs 1.2 million doctors. If all the diaspora, continental Africans and African American doctors were to go home to Africa today, we're only going to meet about 30% of the need. Many heads of states thought building new hospitals, renovating old ones was the way to address the issues of healthcare. Guess what? Most of those wards, half of them are empty because there are no doctors. I like to talk about my husband's country, my own country, Ghana. There are more Ghanaian doctors in New York City alone than in the entire country of Ghana. So when diaspora start complaining about, oh, my mother was trying to go to the doctor, I said, because you're here. So our reality is capacity is what Africa needs. And where is that capacity? It's in the diaspora, thanks to the brain drain. At every level, every sector, the capacity Africa needs is in the diaspora, not on the continent. $7 billion is being spent every year paying salaries to expatriates going to Africa to provide services. And when I ask, why is it that you never get diaspora to fill some of those jobs? They say, Ambassador, where are they? It goes back to the database. At every level, we are losing out because we are scattered. So in Wakanda, there will be a 1,000-bed teaching hospital to train all the capacity that Africa needs. There will be one Wakanda village in each region, which will be a developmental hub for the region. So for every hospital built, there will be supporting hospitals. Also, we will have a university with technical colleges to train, again, all the capacity Africa needs. Agricultural farm and an agricultural college, hotels for hospitality, a continent with some of the best tourist destinations. We're only realizing about 4% of the tourism dollars in the world. Agriculture for a continent with over 65% of the arable land in the world, we are importing food. I am embarrassed to say that. Africa should be and will be the breadbasket of the world. In addition, in our Wakanda, we're also going to have a pharmaceutical manufacturing. Most of you are also not aware that most of the sub-Saharan African countries, drugs going into those countries, close to 50% have zero bioavailability. That means they are not medication. They are chalk, in some cases, poisonous substances. Millions of people are dying every year thinking they are taking blood pressure medicines, diabetic medicines, antibiotics, when they're taking poison. Those are murderers, outside murderers coming in. Millions of them every day, and nobody is held accountable. We have got to stop that. We must manufacture our own drugs. And of course, there will be a power plant, infrastructure, housing to support the development. It's going to be a very modern city with roads that are ready for self-driving cars, monorails for easy transport around the village. It's going to be how Africa should be. We will build the Africa that we want. For everything that's happening in Wakanda, there is going to be downstream development. You can picture this. A team of healthcare workers whose job is to do nothing but to make sure 15, 20 years from now, access to healthcare is a thing of the past. Educators who are saying 15, 20 years from now, access to healthcare is a thing of the past. Access to power is a thing of the past. Access to water is a thing of the past. We have teams from the diaspora working on the various sectors. Can we not do that, guys?
Yes, we can.
Absolutely, yes, we can. And all we gotta do is organize, because the brains that we need are endless in the diaspora. Then the question becomes, Ambassador, how are we going to fund this? I said, that's easy. We got 50 million black people in this country, 41 African Americans and about 9 million continental Africans. If I just get 1 million of those to put aside $1,000 a year, that's $1 billion. Can we not do that? If I take 5 million, now we're only down to $200 a year. And we got $1 billion. And we take that money, we leverage it, and just keep it in the account. Don't touch it, just leverage it. And not put another penny. We can get $1 billion every year out of that money to build Wakanda. Can we not do that? Can I get an amen?
Amen. Hallelujah.
We can do this. We want the NGOs out of our countries. We want no more aid. Aid is killing us. We don't need aid because we are very capable of taking care of ourselves, especially you, us, diaspora, to whom much is given, much is expected. We can do this. We live in this wonderful, great country. When my last conversation with Chairman Zuma, she said to me, my sister, if sustainable development is going to come to Africa, it's going to be brought by the diaspora, but not just any diaspora, the diaspora in America. The diaspora in America. Think about it. There's something unique about being a diaspora in this country. We already live as Americans, not as Californians, not as Floridians, but Americans. Subconsciously, we're already integrated. So moving into Africa is a piece of cake. So the African leaders and my chairman, Musa Faki Mahamat, they're very clear that in order for Africa to move forward, the children of Africa in the diaspora must be front, middle, and end of it all. So I look forward to our conversations, but I hope that we can all be in the right spirit and agree that we must speak as one continent, one Africa, one voice. Thank you.
We'll move down and begin with you, and then we'll start at that end.
Thank you. A very tough act to follow, Madam Ambassador. But I'm really very grateful to be here. And quite coincidentally, I come from Lincoln University, Pennsylvania, where it all began. The first historically black university in the country that produced Kwame Nkrumah and Nnamdi Azikiwe and the leaders of Pan-Africanism. We have a new president with a new agenda at our university. She came in, Dr. Brenda Allen, and told us that it's a new era. Learn, liberate, and lead. Learn, liberate, and lead. That has become our mantra at our university, again, to continue the legacy of Lincoln University the way it was. And even as if there was a prophetic thing, they say when good things want to happen, the celestial bodies seem to line up. And I can get the witness of my students here. In the last few months or even a year, I've been talking about this as if I'm possessed. And I think that I say that there should be, but I have convinced my administration to start a Center for Black Advancement and Leadership at Lincoln University. And some of the things I thought about is also what Madam Ambassador said about Black Liberation Fund. Black Liberation Fund. I also, as a political scientist, I went to the extent of saying that we also need a Black Political Action Committee to also liberate us here in America. So we have a lot of things to do. And as a Nigerian-born African-American, I belong to the newer diaspora. And we are those who are going to show the light, because I know the neighborhood, and I can take you there, and we can partner so that you do not feel strange. Because what I found out over time is that there is and has been an Afrophobia among our older African Americans, because they're afraid, maybe not for bad reasons. Yes, last August, I traveled to Nigeria with 5 Americans. They happened to be white. They followed me to the village to open up a medical center there. I told my friends they were still wishy-washy, but these Caucasians volunteered. But I want my own people, and I'm doing the propagation at Lincoln University, so we can go there and learn and be part of this and grow this institution. So the Black American community, I owe it myself to educate them and be educated by them. And I have come to see that where there is vision, where there is no vision, the people perish. And where there is vision, the people follow. And what is being provided to us now, continentally and globally as Black people, is a vision and a clear path that we must follow. I am coming here as a member of the HBCU network. I'm taking this back to Lincoln, and I hope that my colleagues are taking this back to their various institutions so that we get this network going and educate the next generation as we have been and get them to Africa consciousness or Black consciousness so that we can have the economic, the political, because I'm very interested in the politics, because some of these things may not work unless the politics is truly reformed. So we need to have a society based on rule of law where people can trust their investments and be able to rely on the system and structure. There is no law that is Zimbabwean or Nigerian. Law is law, and people should follow the law wherever they are. And that is where we are going. So I am very pleased and privileged to be next to you, Madam Ambassador, because only last week I was showing my class your lecture on that you went through the whole Berlin conference and all that, educating our people. And I gave it as a class assignment. That's how interested I am with what you have to say. So this is music to my ears, and I'm going to carry this beautiful music back to the university and hope to network with my colleagues from now on to have this so-called HBCU network to start building. Thank you very much.
Hello, Africa and East Diaspora. My name is, is it okay? My name is Dr. Kankoe Assiongbon. I teach math here at Delaware State University, but I'm only sitting on this panel because I'm also a technology developer. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm a Pan-African, but not a Pan-African the way you guys know it. I call myself IT Pan-African, as I would like to use technology, okay, to help build Africa on what our ancestors actually believe in. Like, I'm a modest person following the steps of Dr. Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, Sekou Touré, all those great African people. So, but I'm doing it through IT, not politics, as you usually know. So, here, what we do is our latest technology is in data and survey technology. I'll get a chance to do a presentation for you guys and see what we have put out there so far. I'm pretty glad that the minister from Chad, I believe, he mentioned about African culture. While we were developing this technology, data technology, so we asked ourselves, what can we get from our African culture? Okay, how can we take things from Africa and try to put it in a technology that people can use? So this application has been developed on the basis of our own African culture, where a company can actually use this technology to collect data, analyze data in real time, and get useful information. And that's something we also want to share with APRM, because I know they collect information, across the continent, and how they can use this technology to move fast, achieve better results in their own mission. So that's what we are doing. And in addition to that, I think, I want to talk about, if you go to Africa, we have what we call native doctors. They are still there. But because of what one of the speakers actually said about, the African culture has been demonized so long, okay? The new generation of Africa is looking back. We want to extract things from our own culture, our roots. So when we started this technology, we were like, look, let's look at what native doctors do in Africa. What they do is what? Based on what we have learned, based on research, they are only doing statistics. Period. When they are out there, throwing their things, they are counting. And after the counting, they will do what? They will calculate some probability, right? And based on probability, they will make predictions. So my role in this company is I'm the head of predictive analytics. If I get data from your company today, I'll be able to make prediction for you. If you're gonna stay in business or not, I'll be able to tell you based on the analysis. And you can see that those things we teach students today in the classroom, they all have a root back to Africa. No matter what you say, what you see today, it started from our motherland that we all love. So that's what we'll be sharing with you guys today. And I'm very glad that the minister mentioned about culture. I'm like, wow, this is how we started with this technology. So we went back to Africa, studied native doctors, what they do, and try to mathematicize that, put statistical models and modernize it so it can be a useful product for the whole of the entire world. If it works in Africa, it means it can work anywhere in the world. That's what is powerful about Africa. And that's what I always tell my people, you know what? Africa is so powerful that if you have a little bit of that Africa in you, you are a very powerful person on earth. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Sharice Casson, and I'm the chair of the Department of Chemistry here at Delaware State University. And in the theme of what Ambassador said about being one voice, I'm going to speak on the area of health disparities, and particularly with the disease, with sickle cell disease. So as many of you know, sickle cell disease is one that plagues our community. And in 2010, the World Health Organization actually designated sickle cell disease as a global concern. So by the year 2050, right now we have an annual number of about 150,000 newborns being born with sickle cell disease. And by 2050, they actually expect that number to double to 300,000. And so this is a problem because about 80% of these cases lie in the sub-Saharan region of Africa. And we just are in our last year of National Institute of Health funding to investigate sickle cell disease and how it plagues our community. And this research work actually took place amongst investigators from clinicians, the nurses, psychologists, basic researchers. And what we found found from this is that it really, when you take to just the core problem of it all, is in the village. So how can we get to the point of prevention and awareness, which is why sickle cell disease becomes more prevalent, is that in our community, we have a tendency to deal with our newborns and our children that are affected with sickle cell disease in the home. So when you look outside of the home, you really don't try to source some extra support in how you actually care for that child. And it actually is that village model that is going to assist in reducing the numbers of sickle cell in our community. And what that means is that we actually have to change the psychology of our community when it comes to these health disparities, understanding that these households often do need sources of support. So this is what we actually found from our research study, is that not saying that the family actually has to come to a medical unit to get care for the child, but that the medical care may need to be taken to the community. Because the major reason why a lot of these I would say victims of sickle cell disease is that we don't have that infrastructure. So the infrastructure to get a child that's plagued with sickle cell disease to the hospital, the parent actually working full time, maybe actually having 2 jobs and not being able to care for the child. So we want to talk about the implication of these type of health disparities in our community so that we can increase our infrastructure, which is ideally what we need to do to reduce the prevalence of sickle cell disease, is actually getting those laboratories in place in the community where we can actually reduce and actually screen for the sickle cell trait, and being able to educate our children and our the adults what to look for and how to ask the questions so that we reduce the prevalence of sickle cell. And the second area that I want to talk about is actually in the area of energy. So we do a lot of work here at Delaware State University, particularly with biofuels and renewable energy. And just coming from an agricultural research symposium down in Florida is when we actually saw a lot of work that can be widespread across the United States and across globally, where we can actually address the different types of renewable resources that we have in Africa, here in the U.S., and being able to address these issues that we have of global concern when it comes to energy and renewable resources. So how can we generate biofuels and stop using petroleum-derived types of products is increasing our knowledge in this area. So I look forward to the discussion in these areas of health and energy, and actually how it can apply widespread across the HBCU network and Africa as well.
Hello. Okay. I would like to thank the organizer to invite me to this very important meeting. My name is Bertrand Hankoa. I'm a research scientist here.
Volume. We can't hear you.
My name is Bertrand Hankoa.
Okay, good.
Okay, I'm a research scientist here, originally from Cameroon. So it's a very, very important opportunity for me, to displace some of the work we do here that has a lot of applicability in agricultural and energy development in Africa. My story is a little bit pathetic because when I was when I was applying for my doctorate program, I got a scholarship from the Swiss Development Corporation. Their interest was to transfer technology that were developed in Swiss Polytechnic on agricultural biotechnology to Africa, because they were working on a major crop called cassava. Cassava is a major staple that feed almost 250 million, African on a daily basis. And one of the concerns with the Swiss Foundation was that they really wanted the technology to be close to farmers. They want the farmers to understand what the technology that is going to help them to improve their nutrition and so over. So, and this program came out. They said, okay, I'm going to do a joint PhD between the University of Ibadan in Nigeria in collaboration with RTA, which is the World Bank Center in charge of agricultural development in Africa, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. So. And then when I went to Switzerland as part of that study, I met some of the Africans there who were telling me that, oh, wow, you are here in the Switzerland, are you going to go back to Africa? You can stay, why do you want to go back, to Africa? But I told some of them that, my interest is to actually, help to transform, this type of technology and also help African country, to be very close to this high tech. So I did my study, part of the study in HES Zurich, and went back to RTA and completed my PhD. But unfortunately, I couldn't get a job, from a national agricultural research system. So I applied for the job, and it was very difficult. I couldn't get the job. So I ended up coming back to the US as a postdoc at the Danforth Center, continue my work on cassava, try to develop cassava resistant to viruses at the Danforth Center. Then later on, move here at Delaware State, and still, part of my work, is to try to address one of the major problems of cassava, which is still not at this point addressed, is the nutrition. So cassava is extremely poor in protein. And then if you try to improve the protein in the tuberous root, which is just like 2% of protein, if you increase it like maybe to 10 or 20%, is going to make a very tremendous effect, to farmers, back in Africa. So it's one of the things, I will probably want to share some of the data that I have from a student from Senegal who completed her master, in this program, and also try to discuss some of the research I do on the renewable energy that could have very strong applicability, to help Africa. And most importantly, one of the initiatives now with the Shell in Netherlands try to valorize waste. I went home 2016 in Yaoundé, and I was driving in the town. The level of municipal waste was overwhelming. And then my understanding was that, how can you even try to even control, the malaria pest, if you have this level of municipal waste in town, So government are probably trying to address those type of situations, but budgets are extremely limited, So we here in the diaspora, we have to identify mechanisms how we are going to transfer some of this knowledge, and together with funding to help our government, to address some of these major problems. So I currently working with Shell to transfer technology to Cameroon, where they can use this waste directly to make a fuel. But one of the difficulty with biofuel application in Africa is that we doesn't have what they call blending policy. So if you don't have this blending policy, it's going to be very, very difficult for this biofuel, to be, economically viable, and that's where the African Union can come, with some of this policy, to help the specific African countries develop blending policy, right? The blending policy is going to help, support, this sector. So it's a great opportunity, and I would like to, provide further detail on what, we do here at the estate.
I'm Vincent Fandong. Bertrand happens to have come to Delaware State through some of the efforts we have been developing here. I think as far as agricultural development is concerned, and I would prefer to start there, but we want to go to education also. I think a lot of the effort that is not in Africa is partly because of we Africans ourselves. With all due respect to the ambassador, some of these challenges are not us who came to the United States and decided to stay, but because of the way our administrations run. Because I hardly wanted to stay in the United States when I came here 22 years ago. Actually, my father didn't want me to stay because I may need to stay that I'm also a traditional ruler. And my father knew that when he dies, I will succeed him. So he hardly wanted me to stay in the United States. But I had to. Why? Because of a few incidents, and I was able to convince him. When I graduated from college, I was so ambitious, I was able to secure, with my BS degree, I was able to secure funds from Europe to work in agricultural development in the country that is supposed to be mine. When I took the first installment of that grant, when I came back for the next installment, the accountant told me that had I lost that first installment and came back a few hours later, I wouldn't have found the rest of the money because the director of the station had simply used it. When I put these kinds of things together, and I tell my father, it's difficult if you really want me to work as hard as you have always wanted me. It's difficult for me to come back. So those are some of the things that we must be able to address. I don't have a problem taking sabbatical and going to any country and spending 6 months either doing research or teaching. But it's just that these opportunities are there, but we cannot afford to do because of the system in place. For as far as research in agriculture is concerned, I have had 3 colleagues from Africa come here to train in my lab through a Fulbright foundation. And that is 3 on 3 because 3 have applied through my lab, all 3 have got. And I think that, and as of now, I was interested in getting more colleagues from Africa, but I don't have that opportunity to have this link. And I hope that opportunities like this can help that kind of link, so that if I wanted to get a colleague from Africa to come and train in a particular area, it will be easy for me to pass through an initiative like this. So one of the things that really hurts agricultural development in Africa is this the idea of GMOs. This problem is not so much from the United States than from Europe, where Europeans have enough to eat and they have the luxury to tell us that GMOs are not good for us. And they will just say, oh, Monsanto, that's a problem. Monsanto, the amount of agricultural development done in the agricultural research done in this country is more than 90% in the universities. The universities do research to develop, not to make money like Monsanto. So I think I read a newspaper either from Zimbabwe, where there was famine and corn sent from the United States that was genetically engineered, was abandoned in warehouses and people were dying. And it's not because of the population, it's because of the politicians. I remember my mother came here and was going back to the United States, going back and asked whether some of the research material that I've done, whether she can take it along and go and use. So some of these problems, we in the diaspora, we could hardly wait to come to Africa and work. So an initiative like this, I hope, has come to stay, and then that we have this opportunity to develop where we come from. So, and lastly, I will talk about education. I currently have a grant that is to do online learning. And I just asked myself, if we had such an initiative so that some of us here, some of the knowledge that we have gained, we can develop some of these programs to make available to students in Africa. I doubt whether there are any students in Africa that don't have cell phones, because some of the programs I'm developing is for students to use cell phones to access through their cell phone. So I think we have a lot of potential. And one of the things, I remember one of my professors in Africa came from the United States, and he usually asked us that when Europeans have problems, they come to the United States to get them solved. Then when we have problems in Africa, we go to Europe. So we have this, we have this capability in the United States that if we are able to take this back home, we stand a better chance than even people from Europe. Thank you.
My name is Virginie Zumenu. Can you hear me? No?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a bit louder.
Okay. My name is Virginie Zumenu. I'm from the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, and thank you for inviting us from UMES. I'm a full professor in nutrition, so I teach nutrition, but I'm also Extension Nutrition and Health Program Director at UMES, and I also have a center for obesity prevention for preschoolers, their siblings, and caregivers. So what I want to talk about here is, the first thing I want to talk about is the situation in terms of health and nutrition in many countries in Africa. My little story is, I've been here for a long time, and then in 2009, I went back home because I have a consultancy in Nigeria, and I stopped back home. I'm from Benin, West Africa, but I also live in Hbcus. So sometimes people think that I'm from Hbcus, but I'm from Benin. So I went home, and my nephew was so happy to see me. And the first thing he did was he went out and bring back a burger. Burger, yes, hamburger. So I didn't want to disappoint him, and I said, thank you so much, but do you know what I do in America? And he said, yeah, I saw online you teach nutrition. And I said, yes, because in America, I'm helping people to live healthy and to stay away from burger. So he was like, oh, I thought that this is so nice, and I want to offer it to you. So I gave him like some lesson about hamburger, and I said, no, what we have here in Africa, what we used to eat here is much, much better. So that's what I call co-globalization. Like, thing comes from here, and then now in many developing countries, including my country, we have what we call not only undernutrition, but overnutrition. So before we always talk about malnutrition, but now we have the same issue, obesity, every kind of disease, you have it in many communities in Africa. So our role as health and nutrition program leaders is becoming more difficult in Africa. And so we need to do something. And I think this opportunity is a very good one because, as I said at the beginning, I'm also Extension Nutrition Program, Nutrition and Health Program Director. An extension role, cooperative extension, I don't know if many people know about cooperative extension here, but cooperative extension, the mission of cooperative extension is to bring the results of the research from academia and then go to the community and apply it to the community. And that's what we are doing in America. For example, we go to the farmers, we teach them about farming, and at the same time we teach them about nutrition. And we go to the community and we teach them about healthy lifestyle, etc. So it would be good to be able to go back and then use the same methodology that you are using here and then share it with the community. For example, for the one of my program, a federal program that is called Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program, FNEP, we use one nice methodology. We go to the community, I go to the community, I don't teach them, I hire people from the community and train them. They don't have to have a degree in nutrition. I train them on my curriculum, and then they go back and teach their peers. So by doing that, they have a connection with the community, and they can explain it better to their community what they need to do compared to me. So I think doing this kind of thing in many countries in Africa will help us. Sometimes it will help us not only in terms of helping people, but it will make everything that you are doing more sustainable. Talking about sustainability, I do a lot of consultancy, so I was doing a consultancy in Ghana, and I was talking with the farmers, the women, and they were like, look at this, you see all these things, they came over, they put the bathroom, they put all these things here, we are not using it. So what we need to do is what we call community engagement, and I have a program here from Robert Johnson Foundation that I'm doing on campus at UMES. And this program, we go to the community, we ask them, what do you need? What do you want to focus on? And then we help them to develop an action plan. And as you talk about the funding, if we have enough funding, then we help them to implement whatever they want to do. So when it comes from them, they know how to sustain this program. And that's very important because so many organizations, they go to many countries, in developing countries, and they just go to the village, you need a well here, you need a church here, you need this here, and then they go back. What happened to them later on? All these projects. Maybe people are not even interested in a well. They have other issues. Why can't we sit down with these people and then have a conversation and see what they want to do, what they want to focus on? Health is everything. Health is not only physical. It can be the environment health, it can be mental health, it can be social health, it can be anything that you need to do. For example, this project, the community engagement that I'm doing at UMES, we went to a community thinking that they will talk first of all about obesity or opioids, etc. What they told us, they said the first thing we want to do is to keep our youth off the street. So that was the first concern. So we focus on this with them. So, and then after that, we call group to come and teach them more about the drug, etc. So I think it's very important for sustainability to talk with the people and then see exactly what they want to do anywhere we want to go in Africa before we start any project. And also, I want to talk about how many projects before, from USAID, from USDA, etc., when they go to Africa, in terms of the farmers, they look at the farmers, and the only thing that they are thinking is how to have a good business with the crops. But the same community where we have the farmers and they are looking for the business, this community, they have health issue. So how can we combine health and farming and be able to help the whole family, the whole population, and gender also? So I remember when I went to Ghana, I went to Ghana and they asked me to show the farmer how they can introduce nutrition education and the nutritional value of the crops with the soybean value chain. And I helped them to do that. So this kind of project can help us to really help the population in many countries in Africa. Another thing that I want to talk about is one day I went to Nigeria to work with a group of HIV caregivers, of HIV orphan caregivers. And my role when I was living in America is to help them to use yam flour as an income generative activity. So my role is to show them how we can manage all this technology. But when I get there, my first meeting with the group, they said we have another issue. We usually give this flour to the malnourished children, and USAID usually send them this flour, but it's running out, so we don't know what to do. And I took the package and read the label, and I said, I can help you. What I did is I used the local product that they have to make a flour that the nutrition they use for the children. So that helped them to know that their own products can be used. They don't have to wait for USAID flour. And they were so happy, and they named the flour that they make, because we go to the market, we choose the 5 cereal that I want to use, we ground it, and then we make the flour and we cook it. And they said, now we have our own cereal, and they gave a name to this flour. This in their language, that is their own cereal. So I was happy about this project because, first of all, it was not part of my assignment, but the excitement that I see through the people, how they were happy about what they make me more happier. It's not money, but it's just satisfaction that I get from this project. So when we are going back home to help the people, I think we also need to think about what can we use, what kind of local product they have there that we can use. And yes, one more thing. I know that many study, we focus on adults, youth, etc. But I think we need to think about the youngest one, the preschooler, because at that age, they can learn a lot, but when they pass 6, 7, 10, they don't want to listen to anybody else. So to change their attitude, especially now they're all facing hamburger or Coca-Cola or whatever in all these countries, they need to learn and know the value of what they have originally in their country. And I think, the last thing is all these projects that I talk about is a kind of applied research. Like we have the research results from our academic departments, and then we go back to the community. We can go back to the community in many countries in Africa. And by using the applied research method, we can also use the students from here or the student over there, and then train them in everything that you are doing. So when we leave, someone will be there to continue the work. Sustainability for me is a key. Thank you.
Let me use this one. Good afternoon. Wow. You know, there was a guy at the central bank who said, the country is suffering from irrational exuberance. Let me tell you, I'm pumped up, but with very, very rational exuberance. Isn't this great? I want to take the honor of thanking the organizers. I know it was already said this morning, but I want to say it myself. And our own former vice president, he was often quoted when he told the president, "This is a big deal." He said, "This is a big blank deal." It is a big deal, okay? And I want our students to appreciate that. You know, yesterday when I was landing with Delta, the head hostess said, "Welcome to BWI and Delta. On behalf of its global partners, I want to thank you for choosing Delta." And then it hit me, you know, I'm coming to a big global, African global issue today, and I said, well, we need to start using slogans like those. Where is some of the greatest art around the world coming from? The music, the culture. Yeah? All right, so we need to stay. Madam Ambassador? Yes. All this is introduction for me to say how honored I am to be on this great table, you know. We're getting there. But above all, I'm very, 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 how do you say? You say I was pumped up with exuberance? I'm so honored to be with the speakers on this table. There are a couple things I would like to bring to bear. Number one, you know, 400 years is a big deal. And we are here celebrating, sir, 400 years of devastating history at the one stage, right? Secondly, and for the organizers to bring it to DSU is significant, because now this is the beginning of a first one, and then the key decision makers are here, so it's ours, right? This is ours. So I'm really feeling great about that. Now, one of the words that have been mentioned from this morning again and this afternoon is connection. And you know, Steve Jobs said at one time, creativity is just connecting things. Creativity is just connecting things. And isn't this a great forum to start doing our connection? And I have no doubt that this connection will lead to big things. All right? We have already heard of the Wakanda. And I want to thank you, Honorable Ambassador, that you have created room there for a little bit of agriculture. And that's the topic I want to deal with today. You have heard my other two colleagues talking about some of the key frontline issues that Delaware State University would be able to contribute and partner and help to build capacity in. As you heard on the video this morning, I like to pick out goal number 2 of the Sustainable Development Goal, and that is to end hunger, achieve food security, improve nutrition, my colleague, and then to promote sustainable agriculture. And all the partners have said, hey, for us to achieve this, we will need to collaborate. And there's where we come in. Delaware State University is already participating in some of this, in dealing with some of these, what we call wicked challenges. And through an instrument funded by USDA, USAID, our partner universities in KNUST, Common Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Delaware State University, we have an instrument we call Analytical Support Systems and Evaluation for agriculture, trade, energy, and environment. And within that framework, Delaware State University has been participating in doing the assessment of what we call AGOA, that is the West African Growth Initiative in West Africa, and that's 21 countries in West Africa. And I had the honor of sitting with the great our great baseball guru, right? And he was sharing with me his passion, not just for baseball, but for agriculture. And one of the things that we mentioned, that we have done the assessment on, is the energy, which is of interest to him. So I was very honored to share those findings with him, and we'll share the report and recommendations for you. We have also done one on seeds, because this is a great deficit, Honorable Ambassador, on the continent, right? Some of the local varieties that have been selected over years and well adapted, but you can't get the volume needed for real high impact production. So we are putting in place, along with some partners, advocacy for investment in the seed sector also. Another important area is in the area of trade. And somebody has mentioned that it is easier to go to Peru from one of the countries than to go across to the border to sell your chicken. All right? So these are key areas in which already our universities are participating. And a key area that we as land-grant universities are mandated to do, and this is why it is easy for us, is because the land grant is to do agriculture research, to do teaching, and to do extension. That is outreach, just like what you're doing with the... So it is easy for us to extend this to our African collaborators. And we have been involved in doing that. I was telling the minister that we have already gone to Chad to assess the cotton sector, and we have brought their scientists from their research station to teach them about soil health, which they really appreciated. Okay, and we continue to do that. The second important source of technical support is coming from our 19, that is the other 18 land-grant universities which are the historically black colleges and universities, who have already developed quite a number of technologies that we can already begin to apply. Dr. Kashan said she was at the ARD Foundation symposium, and one of the apps, our apps man is sitting there, is to help sheep and goat producers. These are the small ruminants, who usually don't have veterinarians working with them, right? And so this app will allow them to send a picture to a vet somewhere, and they can begin to do the diagnostics. So this will help in disease control and productivity. So these HBCUs have a wealth of technologies already on the shelf that we can begin to contribute, including the training of the scientists, what we call strengthening the national agricultural research system. And some of the specifics that we have at DSU that you just heard is in the area of biotechnology for crop improvement. And we are working with partners, for example, to help them identify the different lines of cacao, the Theobroma, that now have, we have helped them to identify that there are some types that have high quality flavors and how also to rapidly multiply those. So this is another area that we can contribute. Another one is improving in soil management, which I have just mentioned. Another one is the seed production system that I also mentioned. And a key one is food safety and human nutrition, right? And then educating some of the extension persons to know how to transfer these technologies to our producers. And a last one I want to mention is the technique we have been using to do the monitoring and evaluation for the best management of projects. All right? Now, I want to end by saying that we often take students to Africa for study abroad programs. And when we took them the last time, we cleared customs, and our students saw the crowd waiting for them at the airport to get on a van. So I told them, hey, students, you know, you have just landed on the motherland, and here you're not a minority. Oh, they were taken aback. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamila White, and I'm the Senior Africa Representative for Mercy Corps. At 19, I was a student at Hampton University studying business and French, and my French teacher convinced me to study abroad. I was studying business and French to study fashion. I was, 5'11". At the age of 11, I had a size 11 shoe. I was almost wearing a size 11. As my mom, who's here, knew, I was 11, 11, 11. And we used to go everywhere looking for clothes for me, and I used to get so upset because there was no diversity in fashion for people that look like me. So I wanted to change that in the fashion industry. That's why I was studying French, because you have to speak French to work in the fashion industry. Bonsoir, monsieur. I would do it in French, but I don't want to slow down the conversation. We can talk later. So I'm sitting in a French class, and she's like, Jamila, I want you to study abroad. And I said, great, let's go to Paris. And she's like, why not Senegal? And I was like, what's that? She's like, Senegal, it's in Africa. I said, I don't want to go to Africa, it's poor. She was like, how about you go to Africa and do something different? So she convinced me to study abroad in Africa. And she was going to Senegal that summer as a Fulbright. And I was 19 years old, the first time I'd ever left the country, the first time I'd ever been on a plane. And I landed at 2 a.m. in Senegal in Dakar. As soon as we arrived, the flight attendants and the crew went on strike, because that's what Royal Air Maroc does if anybody flies Royal Air Maroc. And the university forgot to pick me up at the school. So it's 2 a.m, and I'm just in culture shock. I called my mom and was like, I'm coming back home on the next flight. Needless to say, I'm now 35 and I've never left Africa. So at that thing, so studying abroad in Dakar, there was about a cohort of 25 students. I was the only African American. At the university, my fellow African counterparts at first treated me a little bit different because they hadn't experienced another African American student that came to study. It was only Caucasian and Asian students that came. So my time in Senegal changed my life. I went back to Hampton, and unfortunately, we didn't have an international development or international affairs program, so I continued my business studies and worked with my professors to take other classes to get me where I needed to be. I eventually did go on to study in France, got an internship with the State Department in Abu Dhabi as the only Black intern again that summer, only HBCU intern, also within the cohort of Africa and the Middle East, the only HBCU student. Everybody else was from the Ivy Leagues, studying political science, fluent in this. Who are you? Oh, I'm from, DC and Fredericksburg, Virginia, we're at Hampton University. That was me, and that's still who I am. So my story is a little bit different, because from there, I left Hampton, went to get a master's at Indiana University, and at 21 moved to Liberia to work on a USDA-funded program in agriculture. So I stayed in Liberia right after the war, working with ex-combatants and women farmers, teaching them how to plant cassava, how to produce cassava in different ways. And I learned from local leaders. So for the last 12 years, I'm an agriculture and economic trade and economic growth specialist that has been working on the continent, living in Liberia, Mali, Sierra Leone, Guinea, in Ghana. The most of my time was spent in Liberia, 5 years, working on agriculture. And then I left living the continent full-time at the end of 2015 as I worked with Sierra Leone and Guinea to help fight Ebola and help them to end that epidemic. So I was an Ebola fighter for 11 months on the ground in the hospitals and the clinics. So my experience is a little bit different. When I came home, working in Africa, being an HBCU student, being Black American in Africa, I was still like one of 5. You're in there and you talk about expats and the NGOs. We're not there. Blacks are not there. And I'm like, why are we here? Why are all of my colleagues white? Why are we designing development programs, where we're not at the table? So I talked to, my colleagues and my businesses and stuff and say, why am I the only Black person here and we work in Africa? Why is everybody white? Why is the Africa director white? Why is the senior Africa director white? Why is everybody white and we work in Africa? And they say the same thing the ambassador said. Where are they? We don't know where to hire them. And I say they're right here at your Black colleges and universities. Howard University down the street, why don't you go and recruit from them? So the narrative within the international development sector from the US is very much driven from USAID, the United States International Agency for Aid and Development. USAID came from Department of State. What does diplomats look like for America? White, male, Yale. So what do you think American policy is influenced by in USAID? So the same diplomats that work to design our policy and implement it within USAID and other programmers don't look like us, and they're representing us and creating solutions for us. So I started speaking out and saying, you know what, African leaders, tell USAID, we don't want your aid, we want your trade. We don't want your aid, we want your trade. Right now in Rwanda, I don't know how many people know this, Rwanda signed a deal with BMW to build the first car manufacturing BMWs in Africa, the first African country to have a manufacturing plant. Because the president of Rwanda, and I'm not going to get into him, whether we like him or not, all that stuff is for later, because he said, I don't want your aid, I want your trade. He said, you know what, France, I'm not going to speak your language anymore. I don't want it. We're not even going to use the currency, but they took that empowerment back. And so when I came back home from Africa, one of the things I decided to do was to use my platform and use my network to increase the pipeline of qualified Black persons working in international development and affairs and taking us to lead international development and affairs, and to talk to USAID and call them out on the racism, call them out on the discrimination, show them how their policies, their procurement, everything discriminates against underrepresented groups and minority groups. And I've had a little bit of success. You get the doors closed a lot, but you just keep making that movement. But one of the things I like to say, that I've been doing, I work with a lot of the HBCUs in the DC and Baltimore area to help them talk to their students about international affairs and development, to talk to them about this career, to help create that pipeline of the next set of leaders that will help transform Africa. Because in order to transform, you got to know about it, you got to be in the game, and you have to be educated and connected. So to be in these positions, you have to know about it. How do we create that pipeline? For any HBCUs, any Morgan State student graduating right now, if you want to get the basic job at USAID or working in some type of international development or African development, you're going to have to speak another language and have some experience overseas. How many of our HBCU students can we say speak 2 languages outside of English? How many of them have that international experience? Hardly any, because we are not there. The opportunities are not there. Our institutions are not pushing this. We are losing out as HBCUs on our future. We are letting it be written for us. USAID gives over, I think, I'm just going to say a year, probably about $2 billion in programs a year. That $2 billion goes to 20 organizations in the US. 0 of those organizations are led by a Black person. Out of the money that goes to USAID, 60% goes to Africa. 60 to 70% is dedicated to Africa. So if, say, 60 to 70% of US international development dollars, say $1 billion, so we have 600,000, is going to Africa, but going through 20 American countries where not one of them is led, trusted, has equity by the Black community. So think about where that money is going back. So when we talk about the economics of what we're doing, we got to understand, we have to be there creating that pipeline and saying, give us our seat at the table and our fair share of the pie. We talk about global health, global education, sickle cell, all these diseases. Do you know where most of the research money for sickle cell and other global diseases that affect Black people in Africa goes to? White institutions. Howard University Medical School is not getting the, Howard University was not there fighting Ebola. You know who was there? Columbia was there, Penn State was there, Cuba was there. All these doctors and medical students from all of these schools around the world, but Howard University Medical did not have a huge presence. They didn't get the funding to come out there and do that work. So what I'm saying is that, you know, when we look at what we need to do as HBCUs, we need to come together to have a committee of people working in the industry, people like me, products of HBCU, proud products of HBCUs, proponents of HBCUs, to say, how can we pull together and use the networks that we have to do what we need to do? We have a lot of strong HBCU graduates leading international affairs and international development, but they're not pushing our universities, you know, back to where they need to be. The case of Bennett College almost broke my heart. How did we get here in 2019? You know, but just taking that example of, are we preparing ourselves for the future? How can we prepare ourselves to help Africa transform into the Wakanda that we all know it to be? How are we doing our students that service and helping them to be prepared to be leaders? And I think summits like this and these opportunities are where it all starts. And just keeping ourselves educated and making sure to have a good, diverse mix at the table. So I'm so honored to be here among some of the brightest in the country working on these issues. And I'm so thankful for Ezrah for giving me the opportunity to kind of tell my story and to bring this awareness to you all. Because I can talk about agriculture all day, and you know, I love agriculture. I may not look like it, but I'm a farmer at heart. I've invested in several farms in Senegal. A big proponent of women's economic empowerment. Most people don't know 70% of agriculture and farmers are women. It's women. You guys probably didn't even think of that. Didn't even know that. 70% of farmers in agriculture are 70% of African farmers are women. Well, you could say 60, 70% in certain countries. Do you know in Africa, agriculture is the largest sector, the biggest driver of GDP. Do you know how much finance and investment goes into agriculture? The African Union made the Maputo agreement that African countries should budget at least 10% of their domestic budgets to agriculture because it's the greatest GDP and economic driver. Most African countries are not budgeting 1% of that budget to agriculture. So you have 60 to 70% of the continent's GDP is tied in agriculture, and national countries are not even budgeting 5% investment in that sector. And of that sector, 70% of the people working in that sector are women. So think about what women's economic empowerment is going. So I don't want to get you guys with all these statistics and stuff because we have some great, brilliant minds that are solving all these issues. But when I want to come here and say as HBCU, serve your students by coming together, building those opportunities, tap into your alumni networks to say, where are you in this world? How can you get us there? And that $1 billion can come easier than you think, with the right amount of leaders that are there. And African leaders start telling USAID, we don't want your aid, we want your trade. Operate with us differently. Change the terms of which you operate. Because just as much as African countries and people want to come here, you guys have no idea how much we want to go there. You have no idea how much American businesses spend in hiring consultants and strategists and getting into Africa. Ethiopia is the fastest growing economy in the world, not in Africa, in the world. Ethiopia is the fastest growing economy. Africa has 10 of the fastest growing economies in 2019. Do we know what that means? But like my sister said, who worked at some of the trade associations, I was just with the Corporate Council in Africa, the president, yesterday down in Washington, D.C., for the first time in its history, it hired a Black woman as a president. The previous president for 20 years was a white man. So I want you guys to say, we got to be in the positions, we got to be in the pipeline. We have to have trust in ourselves, pull each other up, and provide these opportunities. And forums like this is exactly where it needs to be. And kind of before I start with my little speech today, I was living in Mali back in 2017. It seems like a long time ago, but I get confused sometimes. I was living in Mali. and I was working on a USAID-funded livestock agriculture project. And I was working with a U.S. small minority business. Brother graduated from Morehouse from Trenton, New Jersey, started a company, and got interested in Africa. So we were working together to develop an app to help farmers get market data about livestock and other crops, and also to get climate data. And we can talk about why climate data is so important in agriculture another day. But we needed a research institution to partner with to help us with some of the research. So I contacted 2 HBCUs in the US. I was living in Mali right now, but I was like, okay, I know these 2 HBCUs because they got agriculture in the name, and I'm not gonna call them out. Do you know they never even replied to my emails? I said I have an opportunity where some of your professors, a small grant, can come out here in Mali just to do an assessment for me, pay for everything, want to get a different angle. Didn't reply to my emails. You know who did? Texas A&M did. So what I want you to say is, HBCUs, we have to be prepared to lead. When I was a student, before I let this go, and my mom can tell you, so I studied in Senegal for the first time leaving the country, studying abroad. After that, as you can see, I'd never worked in the fashion industry again, even though I'm fly. I still never worked in fashion again. But went back to Hampton, and continued to study French. We had the opportunity to go to France to study, and I had to get the university to accept the credits from the school in France. And the dean at the time of the entire School of Business, not management, because I was doing management, I was meeting with him and the chair of the management department, and he didn't want to approve my study abroad. I was one of 2 students going abroad for a semester. Because university wasn't tracking it that much. It was only 2 of us going abroad, representing the university. And he had said, well, how do I know the school in France education was as good as ours? And I was like, Google. It'll tell you education in France is better than education in America. Like, these are basic things. But my chair had to convince him to take the credits to allow me that opportunity to go to France. And then when I left, she sent a check to my house for $2,500. She was like, just so you know, don't worry about it. I want you to be good while you're there. But could you imagine, I'm in a university studying business at HBCU, and the opportunity to go to France was questioned. So just want to say, we got to educate ourselves, we got to empower ourselves, we got to look to the future and make sure that we are doing what we need to do as HBCUs to stay relevant and to be a part of this transformation that needs to happen. Thank you.
And to comment and finalize on the panel, we're going to have our illustrious Professor Ambassador Ibrahim Gambari.
Well, this is a heavyweight panel. Wouldn't you agree with me? Give them a round of applause. It's a heavyweight panel because of numbers. There are 9 of them. It's also a heavyweight panel because they've covered a range of specialties, ranging from technology, sickle cell disease, health infrastructure, energy, biofuel, renewable energy, research sciences, agricultural development, nutrition and health, agriculture, and business studies. What else have we not covered? So my task was simply to take notes of what everybody has said and to bring this to the attention of the leaders of Africa whenever discussions are going on about APRM, about NEPAD, in terms of the opportunities for collaboration between Africa and the African diaspora, its own 6th region. But I thought that's easy. What I thought would be a bit of interest, and to me also, having listened very carefully, is to just summarize and in the professorial hats that I'm wearing. This doesn't look professorial, does it? But what would be the major takeaways from all this conversation? And I think the first is about the opportunities for expanded trade among the Africans themselves. Until the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement was signed in Kigali, and it's notable that it's in Kigali, less than 14% of Africa's trade with the world is among themselves. And with the signing of this treaty, the opportunities are that A, that African trade among themselves will jump to by almost 50%. B, the SMEs, who are the really engines of growth in the continent, the small and medium enterprises, would double. Africa's GDP would double. But more importantly, Africa's wealth will be staying more in Africa. Because when you trade more among yourself, insurance, banking, transportation, all of that will remain in Africa. Part of the problem of the continent is that we are the only continent in the world where our wealth does not stay in our continent. I think about 14% of Africa's private wealth are in Africa. In Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, the proportion is 50% and more. And all this money is they're not all stolen. Some are. I'm from Nigeria. A lot of money has been stolen by people in public office that have been kept abroad. But even people earning legitimate income, most of that is not in our continent. So with African Free Trade Treaty, with more of African trade being among themselves, growth in GDP, growth in SMEs, the wealth of Africa will stay more in Africa. That's the first takeaway. The second is that we need to develop mutual comprehension about ourselves. There's a lot of misconceptions. Some people, as our ambassador in Washington said, some diaspora people go to Africa assuming that nobody knows much and we are here to teach them, okay? Or some Africans, sovereign countries, think they have very little to learn from the diaspora, at least on how to run their countries, because they don't have their own countries to run, except perhaps in the Caribbean. So we have to have mutual comprehension about opportunities as well as challenges. The third is that as the world is moving away from resource-based economy to knowledge-based economy, then science and technology, cooperation in the technical field must become very important. This is an area in which clearly the diaspora may have an advantage, in which therefore we can share. The third, or the fourth, is the nexus between peace, good governance, and development is nowhere clearer than in Africa. And that is why I think the African leaders, through the APRM, believe that at the core of many conflicts in Africa is poor governance. And without peace, you will not have development. And without development, you will not have durable peace. And you will have neither peace nor development unless you have democratization, respect for human rights, and good governance. This is an area which I think there's room for further thinking and collaboration between us and the diaspora, which has been recognized as the sixth region. But to transform that sixth region from a concept of landmass into ideas, the sixth region of ideas, of technology exchange, of collaboration. The final point that I'd like to make in terms of perhaps a takeaway is that it's not all, even in terms of narrative, it's not all bleak. The narrative of Africa is actually changing. We can accelerate it, but you recall that in the 70s, there was an Economist magazine which had as its front cover story, Africa, the hopeless continent. Only in the 1970s. Nobody is saying that anymore because, among the fastest growing economies in the world now contains some African countries. Secondly, you will see that the middle class in Africa is expanding. Therefore, the opportunities for purchasing power is great, so that when you invest in Africa, the rate of return is among the highest in the world. But also, I think, more importantly, unlike other continents, Africa is a youthful continent. In Asia, they are aging. In Europe, they are aging. In North America, aging population. But in Africa, is the youth. Therefore, the future of Africa is in the youth and also the women. and nowhere more powerful in the world than in Africa. So for these reasons, what used to be Afro-pessimism is moving towards Afro-optimism. There's a lot of hope in the country. That's where everybody is there. The Chinese are there. Everybody now wants to have summit meeting with African leaders. In fact, there's a downside to that, which I'll mention in a minute. The Japanese have African-Japan relations summit. The Chinese have. The Indians have. Turkey has. The downside, Europe, of course, have. The downside is they are not staying at home. They should be staying at home more because their constituency is at home. But the reason why they're having this summit is not because they love Africa suddenly, but because Africa is changing. So that narrative, we must also work together to change it. I think it was Churchill who once said, history will be kind to me. And people say, how? He said, because I intend to write it. So I think, and he did write history. Now, so I think the African narrative is changing, but we must continue to be the one to write it, in very concrete ways. So the collaboration and the partnership between Africa, between APRM and the historical black colleges and universities, the implementation of that idea is one that has come. So let's get on with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If I could give a Churchill quote, in 1943, when World War II was raging, Churchill came to Harvard, and he gave a speech where he said that empires of the future would be empires of the mind. In other words, he was saying what Hitler was doing to fellow Europeans had to stop. The things that Europeans had been doing all along in Africa and in Asia, they were now rethinking the calibrations of how the world would move forward from that point. And if you look at the institutions that Europeans established after 1943, that they allowed Africans eventually to participate in, you'll see a series of institutional powers and control that still exist today in many different forms. And so we have to look at the way the intellectual and institutional designs of the world, the way those things have unfolded since 1943, which, I often look at and marvel as to how the reins of power and controls have been designed from that point onward. And so in order to really get in the game of this institutional intellectual power, the way that it unfolds in the world, we have to begin with our intellectual institutions. And that's why this initiative is so important. That's why the Center for Global Africa, as we have outlined it, is designed to be something that can set a blueprint for African people, not just with the connections and the network that we're establishing, but as well with other institutional designs that need to occur, whether they be economic, whether they be with agriculture, whether they be with financial things. These are the types of collaborations that we need to establish. So I want to thank this panel for coming and thanking you for your time, your expertise.